Hello, my name is Aneez Esmail and I'm a Professor of General Practice at the University of Manchester. It gives me a great pleasure to say a few words about Yasmin Farooq's book, Elite Migrants, South Asian Doctors in the United Kingdom. I was one of the supervisors for Yasmin's PhD, and this was the genesis of the book that she's written. It's really an important work of scholarship, and for several reasons. You will know that, those of you who are interested in this area will know that the NHS is quite interesting because, as a national institution, it has a large number of ethnic minorities working in it, both in jobs at the low level, for example, hospital porters, cleaners, and then in nursing and also in the medical profession. And it will surprise many to know that the NHS, probably about a third of the medical workforce, are ethnic minority doctors, and the majority of them are actually doctors who qualified abroad and came to work in the UK. And I remember very clearly at the beginning of this year, when the COVID outbreak started, and you will all have read newspaper articles about the large number of ethnic minority doctors and other ethnic minority staff who were dying in the NHS. It was quite stark, actually, of all the early deaths amongst healthcare workers, for example. There was a huge preponderance of ethnic minorities. I think the figures, if we look at them, are probably about 60% of all deaths at the beginning, at least, of NHS care staff were ethnic minorities. And I remember at the time a few journalists ringing me up. I've done a lot of work around racism in the NHS, written lots of articles about this, and journalists from Europe rang me up. I mean, I remember there was a French journalist who was writing for Le Monde, and then a few of her colleagues who were writing for a German broadsheet paper. And they were saying to me, what's going on in the UK? Why is it suddenly that it is reporting so many ethnic minority doctors are dying from COVID? What is happening? And I think that those people who don't live in the UK are quite surprised when they're told that such a large proportion of the workforce are ethnic minorities. And I recounted the history, talking to them about how the NHS ends up with having a lot of ethnic minority doctors working for it. And this was quite surprising for them because I think if you look at France, if you look at Germany, although they have ethnic minority doctors, it's not in the same proportion as exists in the UK. And of course, one of the reasons why COVID so disproportionately affected ethnic minority care workers, I think, is because of some of the structural issues of racism that are embedded in the NHS. And it seems for an audience that sort of doesn't believe racism works like this, it might seem quite a serious thing to say. But there is no doubt in my mind that this is one of the factors that contributed hugely to the excess number of deaths. Now, why is this relevant to Yasmin's book? Because I, for example, have been researching the role of ethnic minority doctors, the role they play in the NHS, how they're discriminated against, the problems they face, and so on, for many, many years. And my work initially just talked about the big discrepancies, for example, how difficult it was in getting jobs, what happened when cases were brought before the General Medical Council, career progression, things like that. So I was in a way documenting the broad problem of racism in the NHS. But I am the first to admit that I never had the knowledge or the experience or the expertise to actually describe in much more detail how that all functioned. What were the factors that led to it? What was the experience of the individual doctors? And I think one of the great contributions of a book like Yasmin's is that it begins to do this. And of course, what is happening is that Yasmin is bringing her background in sociology, her background in social statistics, to bear on this really, really important topic. And it's one of the few books that actually charts the individual stories of these elite migrants. And they're called elite migrants, not because they are somehow above everyone else, but unusually so for the UK. These migrants were highly skilled and they came to work in the NHS. And the stories are important because being highly skilled, they had certain expectations. And that expectation was that they would be able to thrive in this organization, that there would be no barriers to their progression because they were starting at a level which should have protected them against a lot of the discrimination that many people faced. And what Yasmin's book has done very nicely is tell the stories of this group of people. Sure, it's a sample, and it was mainly in the north, but I think that the beauty of the book is that it describes their experience, their stories. And what is fascinating, and I think this is what's one of the very important things about this book, and it will be very important to future generations of researchers, is that it begins to sort of open up the trajectories of this group of people, not just why they came, and that's important in its own right, but what happened when they arrived. What did they do in order to establish themselves? What were the barriers they faced? And how did they overcome these barriers? Because I think one of the things that is really important about the NHS is that it is an incredibly moving story in the sense that this group of professionals, highly skilled, in a way overcame many of the barriers, and they then contributed hugely to the development of the NHS. So her work is focused on general practitioners, and general practice is frequently referred to as a jewel in the crown of the NHS. And yet, if nearly 40% of the doctors who work in general practice are ethnic minorities, the majority of whom have come from overseas as elite migrants over a period of time of, say, 30 or 40 years. When we talk about primary care or general practice being a jewel in the crown of the NHS, we then have to really acknowledge that it is these ethnic minority doctors who made it that jewel in the crown of the NHS. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. And this is a story that Yasmin tells of this group of doctors who faced insurmountable barriers, who overcame them, who then molded this specialty, built up links within their communities, overcame racism and discrimination at many, many levels, and ended up providing a level of care which is really important for a whole tranche of the British population. And this is important because it is, in England particularly, it is how people get the healthcare through primary care. So it is very important to recognise that ethnic minority doctors played a huge role in raising the standards in the specialty and in making sure that the healthcare that was delivered was of a high standard and quality. The book is also important because I think unusually Yasmin was able to do many of her interviews in Urdu, and whilst many of these doctors, of course, spoke fluent English, I think when you are discussing your family, your history, and so on, sometimes it's much easier to use the language and the metaphors of your original language. And I think this certainly comes across when you read some of the transcripts that Yasmin has. And she manages to bring this into her book very effectively. The other reason that this book is really going to be important is because I think the NHS will continue, despite Brexit, despite the current narrative around immigration in the UK, will continue to depend on immigrant doctors. It is actually how the NHS has been created. It can never provide the skilled professionals from within the UK. not at the moment, and probably not in the next 20 or 30 years. It will always depend on migration of skilled professionals coming, whether it's from the Philippines, whether it's from India, whether it's from the Arab countries or the subcontinent. It will depend on this group in order to meet its workforce need, especially the skilled workforce needs. So in a way, it's really important that we have a narrative and a sociology which describes and explains this for future generations of researchers. And I think this is also where Yasmin's book is going to be very important. So despite Brexit, despite the changing patterns of immigration, what we have here is, I think, a unique story of migrants who came into the system and transformed it for the better. And I think that it's really important that this history of this great British institution, the NHS, is now getting the scrutiny from researchers like Yasmin, who are actually now beginning to write about that narrative and that story and that incredible contribution that has been made by this group of elite migrants. So I hope that people will read the book, not now, but also it will become a manual for future researchers as they delve into this rich and varied and beautiful history. Thank you very much.